Sarah, welcome to the Dr. Tom Show. I am so excited that you're joining us today. It really is an honor to have you on. You have had your own super successful podcast, which I hope is going to return. So,
No pressure.
so much valuable content to your community, and I really just want to get that out there. So, your field of expertise is pregnancy, is pediatrics, motherhood, which I suppose you've learned through being a mother over the last 7 years. Kids coming up to 4, which is amazing. But I suppose you had this, like most people do, this perfect view of pregnancy, and then your first child maybe didn't go the way that you had expected, which we'll get on to discuss. But I've got a really great opener for you and for our audience. I'm super excited to hear the answer of this because it is controversial and I love it. A healthy baby isn't all that matters. Explain that to me. Where does that? Because I suppose when we ask the question, you know, would you rather have a boy or a girl? And most people's answer is, I don't mind so long as it is healthy. But you saying healthy isn't all that matters. Tell me about that. Where's that come from?
You know, this is something that it stems back to when my first baby was born. He was prem, and I don't know whether it was just before he was born or just after he was born. I came across an article from Millie Hill, who runs and kind of founded the positive birth movement. And this article was, a healthy baby is not all that matters. And it just, for me, it just blew my mind that someone was finally saying what I was thinking. So quite a lot of the time, we kind of talk about birth experiences and they're almost like dismissed. So if you think about planning your wedding, no doubt you and Sarah spent a lot of time doing the nitty gritty on every little thing, right? Like to the point of color coordination and which particular shade of a certain color, like ridiculous fine detail. Yeah?
Yes.
Maybe a little bit.
I might have overseen it, but yes, it happened.
You're like, yeah, I was really, really down for that specific shade. But like everyone just, it makes sense. Like if you're planning a holiday of a lifetime, you go into massive, massive detail with it. And then with a baby, you get these bridezillas, but bridezilla baby versions who are like, well, you know, I want optimal cord clamping and I want to have the baby at home and I want to have this type of music. And people are like, seriously, chill out. Like it doesn't matter as long as the baby's healthy.
I get it.
And their whole experience, like it's like weddings are, it's okay to be a once in a lifetime experience that you put everything into. But when you have a baby, it's a similar but different thing. And I think a lot of the power comes in actually deciding what you want all of those steps to be, knowing that that's not like a plan, this is definitely going to happen. Like you don't know if it's going to rain on your wedding day, but you still hope for sunshine. You find that a lot of the power comes through determining, well, actually, I would prefer this. That would be a next best thing. This is the thing I absolutely want to avoid.
What happens if you get the thing you want to avoid?
If you get the thing that you really want to avoid, like sometimes it doesn't happen the way that you want it to. Like, so for me, with George, my eldest, I wanted a home birth, but I kind of went in that blinkered thing of, I'm young, I'm fit, I'm healthy, I'm having a home birth. I'm not even going to look at anything else because that is admitting defeat. So I didn't view a hospital. I didn't even look into surgery. I just was like having a home birth. And then I got to 31 weeks and the fundal height measurement, which is like the tape measure test, said that my baby hadn't grown between the 28-week and the 31-week appointment. So they wanted to refer me out from the community team into the hospital for another scan. And I was like, oh my God, really? Like, I can't be bothered. I'd already had a growth scan at 24 weeks and they'd said baby was fine. So I was completely dismissive of everything and just was like, oh, this is just another hoop I've got to jump through. And so went for the scan. They tested what they tested. They found what they found. And basically there wasn't enough blood flow going from the placenta to the baby. So obviously baby gets everything it needs from the placenta and from the blood flow. So they kind of dropped the bombshell that I wasn't having this baby at home. It was going to be a cesarean and that the longest I was going to go was 34 weeks. but it wasn't serious enough to worry. So they sent me home and they were going to send me for another scan. And, just kind of, it was all a bit higgledy-piggledy in my mind. Anyway, fast forward 33 and 4 in the end, it ended up being. He was born at 2:00 in the morning. And at about 9:30 in the morning, I had this realization that my baby, who I still hadn't had the chance to hold, was not getting fed, and I hadn't expressed, and it was like this mad panic. And they were like, "Oh yeah, it's fine. They'll probably have him on formula or something." And everything that I did not want to happen was happening. And I ended up really struggling, because whenever I tried to say to anyone how I was feeling, "Oh, but he's healthy now and he's in the right place." And that kept coming up. And we were in the hospital for just shy of 5 weeks with him. And then even for, 18 months afterwards, when I would tell people what happened with my birth story, I would start crying because I kind of couldn't compute it. And I just kept getting the same message. "Oh, but he's healthy now. But look at him, he's fine now." And it was like my experience didn't matter at all because he was fine.
I suppose it's really key, and I've never ever seen it that way with pregnancy before. I suppose what I can link it to is if someone's going through, let's say someone's going through cancer treatment, nobody ever asks, or very few people ask, how the partner of that person is doing, because it's all about them getting healthy. But what about their experience, which is a big part of it?
Yeah.
So what do women like? That's how I can relate, and thank you for saying me, because you filled a gap in some of my ignorance, maybe. But it's, what do women need then? How do we help them, or how do they help themselves in that situation? What do they need?
To be honest, we're all so totally different. I think the biggest thing you can ask is ask the woman, what do you need from me? Because with the five love languages, we all have a different way of kind of giving and receiving love. We have different ways of dealing with things. Some people want to talk, others don't. Some people, want hands-on, they want hugs and massages, and they want to dampen down their nervous system in that response. So I think the first thing is to ask people, but I think the kind of take the step back would be, well, let's actually prepare better in pregnancy. Because if we can prepare, not necessarily prepare for all outcomes, because you can't ever prepare for all outcomes, but I kind of buried my head in the sand a little bit first time round. And then it just completely took me by surprise. It was like a bat around my head. Had no idea it was coming, and then was like, ugh, completely frozen. But yeah, so my mental health was massively affected by that. I ended up having PTSD from the birth trauma, which, obviously married to a soldier, the only time I've ever heard of PTSD is war trauma. So you can imagine I didn't tell anybody that I'd been diagnosed with PTSD, because I was like, how on earth, what an imposter. But the more I've come to work with people, most of my practice now is built up with second time mums who've had a really traumatic first birth experience.
That links in beautifully, because you mentioned that fear can have a huge impact on the birth, but also development. And I suppose this is most pertinent for second-time mums, because we've now got some really preconceived ideas of what's to come. And if it has been a really bad first experience, then I suppose managing that fear is essential. If it can have, what effect can it have on a developing child or the birth process? So
we know. We know that there's probably more stuff we don't know than what we do know. The brain, or the primitive brain, starts developing at around 16 days. So before most women even know that they're pregnant, their babies are already developing a brain and nervous system. So the way that the baby's brain, basically in simplistic terms, it starts developing a series of pathways in utero, in the womb. And it gets, obviously we know that it gets all the food and nutrients across the placenta, which is why we're told not to smoke, not to drink, not to eat certain foods, because we don't want those becoming toxic to the baby. What a lot of people don't know is that the sort of stress hormones also pass through into the baby. So you could have a baby whose mum is being flooded with these stress hormones. And then, of course, the baby's going to be flooded with those stress hormones. And as they're then developing, their little brain is creating all these pathways to stimulate that stress response or the fight or flight response. So when they then are born, they're already kind of geared up as if they're coming into a war zone. And what should happen is we should have a stress response, something stresses us out for a bit, and then we calm down again. So the baby's learning that actually it's like it sort of flows up and down and it becomes regulated. But when the stress response is kind of constantly on, then quite often these babies are born and they're in this kind of hyper alert state.
And can that lead to therefore, issues such as if people are caught in a stress response, I know as adults, but we reduce the immune system, we reduce our ability to absorb our nutrient intake, our development. So I assume it's the same for kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just like with us, our blood flow will kind of change, or our brains and our bodies will change where our blood is flowing to. So it will divert away from the digestive system, for instance, and go to the musculature. So we can run away from that tiger. Exactly the same thing happens with a baby. So you get these babies who are born and their digestive system is not working. So how does that show up? Well, they might not go to the toilet. They might not poo for 4 or 5 days, but somebody's told them along the line that it's normal. Well, is it normal or is it just common?
Love that. Love that. That's such a clouded view these days where we've almost made those two words the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's I believe it's such a sin to someone's health to say something is normal. So what can mothers do to help reduce their stress? What can they do to help themselves through this pregnancy cycle? Is there anything in particular that could be used for anybody in any state of pregnancy or such?
Of course there is. One of the things I absolutely love is hypnobirthing. There's loads of different branches now. When I was first pregnant, there were probably like 2 different types of hypnobirthing courses you can do. Now you can get them everywhere. Like our hospital local to us in Colchester is amazing, and they do a hypnobirthing course for free in-house. But I think you can't access that until kind of quite late in your 3rd trimester. But I think personally, if we can start getting into the habit of meditating, if we can start breathing, like properly breathing. So one of the things that we do as men and women is we don't breathe properly into our diaphragm. So when you kind of put your hands on your hips, if you take a nice deep breath in, you should feel the whole expansion.
Yeah.
So what a lot of the time people will do is they'll feel like their tummy goes out. So they kind of make this pregnant belly, but they're not actually getting full movement. They're sort of respiratory distress, but they've got a big pregnant belly. So silly things like learning how to breathe is a really, really good one, because if you can breathe, you can get more oxygen into your brain. If you're getting more oxygen into your brain, then your body doesn't go into that autopilot of stress physiology. But hypnobirthing is absolutely amazing. And honestly, getting out and moving as much as you can, it's essential. We need to be getting good sleep. We need to be getting adjusted regularly by chiropractors throughout our pregnancy, ones that actually understand the importance of having a fully functional nervous system. We need to make sure that we're eating decent foods. We're not filling our bodies up with toxic junk. I had to really pick my word carefully then. But even with that, like everything, when I'm working with people, I'm constantly looking for what's called a salutogenic viewpoint. So have you come across that term?
For our listeners, please explain salutogenesis.
So basically, salutogenesis is health promoting behaviors.
Brilliant.
So the organic question comes up all the time, and it's like, well, which fruits and vegetables have the most pesticides? Avoid those. And to me, it's kind of not the full picture. So to me, I look at things and don't go, well, that has got the highest concentration of pesticides, so I'll leave that, but everything else is fine. I'm looking at it going, okay, well, my body is taking this food and it's going to create the cells that are going to become my child. So what I want to do here is I want to get the best nutrients into my body. And don't get me wrong, like I will quite happily sit there and eat a share bag of crisps to myself, but
like my wife.
like completely, like, let's be honest with it. But ultimately, the most of the food that I'm putting into my body is good quality, nutrient dense. It's stuff that my body can see, can utilize, can build decent, healthy cells out of, rather than just kind of avoiding all the pesticides. Because I think when we take that we'll avoid pesticide approach, you get that, oh, well, they're everywhere, there's nothing you can do.
It's so true though, isn't it? Like, what you are eating is making your child.
Yeah. It's literally the building blocks.
Made out of crap, or do you want your child made out of healthy, vibrant life?
And the interesting thing, Tom, that you'll find is with a lot of people, they will get into that mindset where they can do whatever they want and it's fine. And this happens with new parents as well. But once they start weaning the baby has everything organic.
Yeah.
But when the mum is breastfeeding, it doesn't matter what she eats, but it matters what the baby eats. So it's not like that they don't care about what they're having, but they don't realize that necessarily through pregnancy and through breastfeeding, all of that goodness is getting distilled down into that baby. Now, don't get me wrong, I still think you should go and breastfeed if you're eating McDonald's and chowing down on that. Like, it's amazing, but I just think if you're looking to optimize things,
I think it is really about education, because it does danger on making people feel bad for maybe some of the choices they've made.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether you know this, but I swear I heard years ago that the crossing of materials across the placenta is not one-to-one. Exemplified as it goes across. So any toxin that gets across there is made worse. Am I right? Am I wrong? Or do you not know?
I don't know. I've heard that. I have heard that, and that's why they avoid, or they tell you to avoid things like tuna, because of like the bioaccumulation of mercury and things. I don't know what the actual stats are, but I tell you something that is scary, is that breast milk has one of the highest concentrations of toxins out of like anything.
Really? Why?
I don't know. Genuinely don't know. I heard that at a seminar and was like, oh.
Obviously from the bioaccumulation of the stuff that the mother has, or stress response has changed.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, like, chiropractic is all over the internet, and a lot of people just see it as a good crack and a crunch and making this body move. Now, I don't see it that way, and I know you don't.
I hate those videos.
No, I hate those videos.
Sorry to those of you who do them.
Why on earth would I take my pregnant wife or take my baby to a chiropractor if my preconception is that? So speak to what chiropractic can actually offer a pregnant woman or a baby.
So first of all, those cracking videos are just awful. Like they serve a purpose. It's like you've been framed. Do you know, it's that kind of thing. It's like car crash TV that you just watch because it's like, oh, that's really cool. But actually working with pregnant women, working with babies, of course it's nothing like that. But it's really easy for me to say that it's nothing like that because I've been doing it now for quite a while. But yeah, I would not take my child to see a chiropractor if I thought that's what they were going to do. So with regard to babies, the simplest thing that or the simplest tool I use to explain to people is I say to them, if you close your eye and you take your index finger and you put your finger onto your eyelid and just press with just enough pressure that it kind of feels a little bit uncomfortable. So it's not painful. It's just a bit like, oh, that's not particularly great. That is probably already more pressure than we use on a newborn. So it's really, really, really gentle. So babies don't have bones in the way that we do as adults. So it's very much more a gentle approach. And it's not so much about treating a particular issue. So lots of people, they'll message me, and it tends to be Facebook messages like, my baby's got horrendous colic. I've been told that you can help with this. Can you help with this? I've been Googling it and I've seen chiropractic can help with colic. So you kind of have to take a step back in the first place. It's not ever going to treat the colic. Like, it just won't. But what chiropractic does is it dampens down that stress response that the baby might well be experiencing and demonstrating. So where we said a minute ago that if your baby's born in that fight or flight stress response, it's basically going to shunt away blood from the digestive system to the muscles. You might find that that baby has like a really, really hyperactive, like startle reflex, for instance. You try to put them down in the cot and they just flail their arms and legs out, scream. So there's lots of things that come together to create a picture of what's going on. And so my job as a chiropractor is to dampen down that stress response as much as possible so that the baby can function better.
I think it's brilliant. And it comes back down to that sort of view on health, isn't it? It's not like what is going on or what have you got. The better question is, well, why have you got that?
Mm-hmm.
And if we have got these conditions which we choose to give a label to, be it colic, then the question is, well, why have they got that? And then you go a level deeper and you say it's that stress response and making ease of that, I think.
Flathead syndrome is another one that's massive.
So flathead syndrome.
Yeah. So
tell me about it.
So obviously babies come out of the birth canal or they come out of the tummy and they have this process called cranial molding. So basically the skull bones are not rock solid. They're moldable and they're movable, and they kind of go over themselves and then they should come back around. So that helps them to squeeze through a teeny tiny space. So we know that they move anyway, and sometimes what can happen is a baby can end up with one side of its beautiful head being just a little bit flatter while the other side's a little bit more rounder. And so that has been kind of coined flathead syndrome. So, sorry?
Is that dangerous to the baby's brain?
I wouldn't say it's dangerous. It's not optimal.
Yeah.
So some people say that it's purely cosmetic.
Yeah.
I would tend to kind of ask the question that if your brain has a certain amount of space that it's supposed to grow into and it's got some of that space has been limited, could that have an impact? I'd say yes, it probably could. And so yeah, they're all kind of questions. It's not necessarily that there's something wrong with the baby, but that the baby's not necessarily functioning at its optimum.
Which is, it's a much better thought on health in general.
Mm-hmm.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But yeah, a lump of junk that's just making its way down the road, you know? Like, it's about not waiting for a problem to happen before we try and fix it and claw our way back, but getting the best expression possible moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, look at how much people spend on their cars and when they're going out and they're buying coordinating nursery furniture and buggies that cost like $1,000.
Yeah.
But they won't necessarily spend the money on their health in that kind of prenatal period. And not just the mum, but the family, like the whole family need to be looking after themselves.
I agree. So let's talk about the mother. So why would a pregnant mum get adjusted? Is it because she's got pain or is there something more to it?
So yeah, sometimes people will come in because they've got pain. I have midwives who refer to me. A lot of midwives have now started to hear about the Webster technique, which is a specific technique for the sacrum, which is like that triangle bit of bone at the bottom of your spine, for those of you who are not chiropractors. So people are starting to understand the benefits of chiropractic for normalizing biomechanics within the spine. So obviously it makes sense as you go through pregnancy, your bump is getting bigger. That is going to have an impact on your spinal alignment, your pelvic alignment. And if you think of the uterus or the womb as being like a hot air balloon sitting in the pelvis, it's got two ligaments at the back that attach onto the sacrum, and you've got two ligaments at the front. So the ones at the back, they kind of move with your sacrum as your sacrum moves. So obviously we need your sacrum to be moving so that those can move, so that the uterus can move. And the ones at the front are the round ligaments, and those are the ones that everyone's heard of.
Yes.
So as we're normalizing the biomechanics of the spine, it's obviously going to make an impact on how mobile you are. So that's where the pain kind of aspect of things come in. What's lesser known in kind of the public, but more known within birth communities of midwives, doulas, physiotherapists and things, is the impact on those biomechanical changes on the shape then of the uterus. So if you imagine that hot air balloon, if one of those four ligaments is pulling slightly skew-if, it's going to change the shape of the uterus. So the uterus is essentially the baby's house while it's inside you. And so if...
The baby?
Pardon?
Could that change the shape of the baby then?
It doesn't necessarily change the shape of the baby, but it changes the room in which the baby's got to grow.
Mm-hmm.
So what's going to happen is the baby's going to find its comfy spot.
Yeah.
As you get bigger into pregnancy or further into pregnancy and your tummy gets bigger, what should happen is that the amniotic fluid decreases, and then the weight of the baby's head pulls him or her into a head down position. And what sometimes happens is if you have a misalignment in your pelvis, your baby hasn't got enough room to wiggle down into that head down position.
So they end up breech, is that right?
Yeah, they can quite often end up breech or transverse. So again, this is the point where a lot of the midwives are then referring people to me for the Webster technique, which is not ideal, but we're getting there.
Yeah.
So at this point, I think the view that a lot of them are taking is that if we can normalize the biomechanics at that point when the baby's breech, it's got more chance of going head down.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. And it does happen quite a lot, not always. So the whole aim with it is to normalize function and optimize function rather than to turn the baby. So just put that out there. But again, it's waiting for a problem to happen and then trying to fix it, rather than saying, well, actually, had we gone 2 trimesters back and ensured that the mum's nervous system was working properly, to ensure that all the nerve flow to the uterus was working properly, to ensure that everything to the baby was working properly, so that the mum and the baby together are kind of harmonized and they're both growing. And well, I say growing, she's not growing, she is growing, but she's not growing. So they're both going through this process together, completely working at an optimal nervous system function. Is that going to be more or less comfortable and going to be more or less beneficial for the baby as well?
More.
Mm-hmm.
Percent. And it's interesting because you speak about the birth, the body knows best. So we as chiropractors can facilitate that, and mothers can facilitate that with their emotions, with the foods they choose, the movement, everything you explained earlier with the hypnobirthing as well. But if we can just sort of round up on how does the body know best, and how can people have confidence in that as they move through their sort of birthing, and even through those first few weeks of watching maybe the first child you've ever had grow? How do we know that the body knows best?
It's that age-old thing where we've kind of educated ourselves out of alignment with ourselves. So instinctively, our bodies do so much stuff behind the scenes that we don't have to consciously think about. Like, there's so much wisdom there already. You take a sperm and an egg, you mix them together and they create a baby.
Wow.
we don't need to put anything in. We don't need to, you know, send these telepathic messages down to our bump and tell the baby what to do. It automatically starts growing nerves and growing ears and growing limbs, and, you know, the lungs start developing. And, you know, with George, I had to have a steroid injection, my preemie, because the gestation that he was, they tend not to have enough surfactant on their lungs. So they needed to give me this injection to help develop his lungs in case he was born early. Like, there's such a finely tuned kind of orchestra taking place in development, and all of that happens without any conscious input from us. If we can optimize our function as birthing mothers, and we can get our heads in the right space, and we can have the support around us, and we, you know, we're in an environment where we feel relaxed and we feel at ease, and we're with the people that we love, and we've got oxytocin flowing through us, the gorgeous love hormone, then a lot of the time our bodies know exactly what to do instinctively. We know to move, we know to squat, we know to lean forward, we know exactly the right kind of touch that we want and exactly where we want it. And God forbid anyone who touches you in the wrong place at that time. So we've got all of this stuff there, but we need to be able to connect within our bodies. So I'm really, really glad that like One Born Every Minute got axed, because that's the kind of stuff that makes women doubt themselves. So I'm in a really, really fortunate position. So my first birth was obviously way off what I wanted it to be. My second birth was a home birth, which I was actually advised against initially, because I was high risk and red flag because of my previous birth. And I knew there was no clinical, there were clinical indicators that something was wrong first time round. Second time round, there were no clinical indicators at all. So at 42 and 1, so just past the point of like, oh my goodness, everyone needs to worry, I had a beautiful home birth. Baby was 9 pounds 6. And yeah, I didn't have any vaginal exams. He was born, he had the cord wrapped around his neck, but the midwives did exactly what they would have done had we been in hospital. So I've kind of had the two extremes. And the difference when you can trust your body and you've done your research and you've done your homework and you feel empowered in whatever choice you make or whatever route your birth takes, is phenomenal.
Amazing. So I can already hear all these mothers wanting to find out more from you, about you. And can you tell, for our audience, can you tell them, you know, where they can get in touch with you and how they can move towards educating themselves?
Yeah, so the podcast that I'm kind of being pushed into a corner to restart is
Yes.
the Pure Natural Pregnancy podcast. It is on iTunes and Stitcher and all of those things. It hasn't been updated for a while. I am on Instagram, which is at Sarah Keane DC. I'm on Facebook, and yeah, I'm happy to get in touch with anybody who needs a little bit of help.
And for mothers who want to see your practices in
Colchester in Essex.
Colchester in Essex.
Yeah, I'm an Essex girl now.
No
But yeah,
chance.
it's Lightbulb Chiropractic.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show. Is there any final word of wisdom that you'd like to leave our audience, or leave mothers or expectant mothers?
Thank you for having me. I think the biggest thing that you can do for yourself is to take the time to really identify what your fears are, what your concerns are, and just absolutely annihilate them, because you can do this. Your body is designed to do this, and you just need to have a dream team around you that's going to support you.
Sarah, thank you ever so much. Amazing words of wisdom. I've certainly learned a lot in that short amount of time. So I really, really appreciate you being on the show. Thank you very much for joining us today.